All right, good morning. It's Friday, March 22nd, 2024. I'm here today again with one of my favorite people in the whole world, Dr. Eleanor Haspel-Portner. I've had a dozen conversations with you, I guess, and each time I keep hearing things that I know others would benefit from hearing. And so today I'm hoping to provide ample opportunity for you to introduce yourself and a bit on your background, what you're working on. But then the intent today is to review Ra-Uru Hu's body graph or design, but from the four worlds perspective, and also, just reflect on your what you knew of the man at the time and the messaging and everything. And so before you introduce yourself, Eleanor, I just want to explain to the audience what I've experienced over the last month or 6 weeks. We connected kind of by accident, but at the same time, it was just super interesting. I have been struggling with human design for 3 years. The words or struggle or it just didn't feel entirely right. I mean, I actually kept rejecting it the first 6 months. I mean, honestly, I thought I was joining Scientology. Just some of the way it came across, it just didn't feel right for me. But it kept getting me at a cellular level. There was just certain things that were just like, there's too much to this to ignore. So I stuck it out. But I think I felt incomplete and disempowered. Empowerment is a word I'll use a few times here, I'm sure.
It is an incomplete system.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Ra acknowledged that, interestingly enough.
Okay, well, we should go there. So let me just say, when I think the second time or the first time we met, you spoke about my design with the total integrated vehicle. And a couple of things you said, it was like you were pressing buttons inside my body. Like it was that level of awareness. And I was hooked. And I've seen that happen with our friend Timothy, who had a bit of lead up to it because we got this idea of what human design is because it's everywhere in this community with that messaging. And at first, it's like, I couldn't be. And then, on the second or third pass, it just kind of sinks in. And your husband, Marvin, earlier was saying like something kind of came online for him recently too, as the material has resurfaced. So I hope maybe he'll share that later as well. So I'm going to stop talking because I can ramble forever. Who are you? And if you could provide a bit on your background, and then we'll move on to the next bit.
I'm Dr. Eleanor Haspel-Portner, and I am a psychologist by training, clinical psychologist, and a social scientist trained at the University of Chicago in a department, first integrative social science department in the world, integrating psychology, sociology, anthropology, and biology. I didn't know at the time, but I was learning about the four worlds. And I've got my license I taught college for 3 years, taught psychological testing, did a major dissertation, and basically went into private practice and began having consciousness experiences. I met Ra in 1996. I went to my first meeting with him was in Taos, New Mexico. And there were things that bothered me, but as in your experience of it, Sean, there was enough truth in the human design system that I was trained as a Jungian analyst. So I understood when I saw the mandala, which I will show you when I share my screen. Mm-hmm. I recognized the tree of life, the chakras, astrology, the hexagrams of the I Ching, And I knew that the synthesis would be really interesting. And in fact, the synthesis is a synthesis of the four worlds. So my background said there's truth here. And when I went to Taos, it was the first time Ra was teaching about circuits, which, by the way, don't hold up scientifically.
Mm.
It's a great story, but the statistics didn't bear out circuitry.
Mhm.
So in skipping ahead, I left human design, I left Ra because he wasn't always honest. But in 1999, he asked if Marvin and I would host him in our home with his family so he could earn money to go back to Ibiza. And although at the time we had severed our relationship with him because of some things he did, we thought the message of human design was valid enough that we needed to say yes. Mm. And when he arrived without his family because Marianne Winokur gave him a house to live in Sedona. And he had an idea. And the idea, which culminated in the 13 books that I published with him and completely have ignored for 20 years. But I do have the books, they're sitting right here. What he wanted was for Marvin and me to be separated from human design and to form a professional organization, which we partnered with Ra. We had a legal partnership called Rave Life Sciences. And the purpose of Rave Life Sciences, as defined by Ra, was to validate the human design system scientifically, to have Marvin integrated into his medical practice, and for me to integrate it into my clinical practice, and to validate and test out what parts of it were valid and what parts were not. As a social scientist, I used the statistical package for the social sciences, and I tested 30,000 cases in 5 matched samples. What did hold up was centers, type. None of the medical or psychological gates and lines that Ra hypothesized held up as accurate. Mm. Neither did his hypotheses about if you have an open center, it means this versus this. Mm. So, for example, in the population of 5,000 people who died of heart attacks, there was no statistical significance about whether or not they had an open or closed heart center. Mm-hmm. Same thing with AIDS patients, same thing with fertility. So in doing the statistics, I went down to the level of colors, bases, and tones, and none of that held up to what Ra was saying content-wise. So I had a dilemma. The human design community wanted me to release the data and misquote it. And as a scientist, I can't do that because my license would be on the line. So I broke from the human design community and from Ra in 2002 and continued doing my research. At the time, I already had the calculations, I believe, for the 4 worlds. And my process in doing that was to use my twin kittens because I had their birth time to the second. And remember, at that time, I was already a trained astrologer. So I knew how to do calculations by hand.
Mhm.
And Joe died at age 10 of cardiomyopathy, and Ruzel lived to age 18, perfectly healthy. So I used those twin kittens to find where in their design, and it was a lunar chart because we knew from Ra that the mammals had a lunar design, not a solar design. So I went down to the lunar minute to calculate the differential in my twin kittens. And as I did that and laid the charts out on my desk, I went, holy shit, this explains it. Literally. And it explained my chart and what I had said to Ra, Ra, my human design chart says I'm a manifester, but I'm not a manifester. I wait and I wait and I wait until the timing tells me to move, and then everything falls into place. Where is it? It's in my lunar chart. And I found the 10th gate in a different chart. So as I looked at my charts, my husband's, my kids, my clients, clinically, it explained things that no other personality tool had ever explained to me. And I taught psychological testing at the college level for a year. So to have a personality instrument that could be more accurate than Myers-Briggs or than the thematic apperception test or the Enneagram was pretty substantial in my view. And I worked with the charts clinically with all my clients, and I went and pulled out charts from all my clients. I had all their astrology charts, and I've worked with it for 20 years. And I finally have the data of each world and how the matrices interface. And then a few weeks ago, I heard a voice that said, you wrote these books with Ra. Look at them. So I pulled out 13 books I wrote with Ra. Most of them were from seminars we did in person, and some of them are just transcripts of Ra speaking. These are the books. I co-authored all of them. And the real importance of them is that Ra recognized as we moved through the basics of human design that it was an incomplete system. And he literally said that without the work that I had done to flesh out the dream designs, he would not have been able to integrate them into or teach them because he didn't fully understand how the matrices interfaced and how to use the he was psychologically unsophisticated. Now, Ron and I had a very pleasant relationship, despite the fact that I knew that he attempted to double dip. He didn't always honor our contract. He didn't pay his bills. But I valued the knowledge. And I knew that he wasn't a scientist. So we need to take what Ross said, and I'm in the process of editing all of the books, and I will teach from them because I think it's valuable to go back to source. And Ra is the source of, now, that said, one of the things that was a personal communication with Ra, because I said to Ra, when we look at the dream, we're horizontal. But when we live, we're vertical. So do the energy, the voice tell you that the energy moves in differently? Because the hexagrams change. And he said, yes. So as I worked with him, he also told me that the voice spent 5 days with him, giving him no information except the specifics of the body graph, and that the body graph has sacred geometry. Now, I own the copyright on the body graph. I've given people like Richard Rudd and Chetan Parkin permission to use my body graph. But most of the body graphs I'm seeing online nowadays are not the right body graph.
Mm.
Rod did not have the copyright once he broke with me. So he changed the dimensions of the body graph.
Oh, wow.
And the body graph is sacred geometry. The voice spent 5 days with him, wanting him to get it exactly right. So using the right body graph communicates on a nonverbal level something about consciousness. So I think we should go to Ra's chart, if
You should.
that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will share my screen.
And maybe as you do this, I'm a fairly unsophisticated person myself, and just seem to keep finding uh, people like you and these things. But um, for anyone that's watching, I kind of view it like 4D chess. Like instead of the body graph being a regular chessboard, there's these dimensions and layers, and I hope you'll speak again to how certain gates become portals from one world to another.
Okay.
Because I think that's much as I can't quite comprehend it, I know there's truth to it, and so that's what I'm kind of exploring in my mind when I'm by
Well,
myself.
actually, Rob talked about it in the book when I taught the first class on the dream rave in November of 1999, because Ra had no understanding of what he was looking at.
Right.
Because remember, he had no psychology education. He didn't understand about the unconscious and the superconscious and the different layers that we live in. But in any case, I show the mandala, which is a synthesis of the tree of life. And one of the things that the human design community has not done, I don't believe, and I could be wrong because I haven't been part of it for so long, but human design is a synthesis of the Kabbalistic tree of life, chakras, astrology, the I Ching, and the piece that I've added into it that didn't exist and doesn't exist in the human design community is critical periods in human development.
Right.
And when in the field of psychology and social science research, when you have independent sources coming up with information that validates each other, it's called consensual validation. And so the work I've done in laying out the calculations and seeing that they exactly coincide with critical periods of the baby's development is very compelling scientific research. And to that point, Ra prenatally started in the 61st hexagram. When he was born, he was in the 51st hexagram. And postnatally, he was in the 53rd hexagram. So if we look at the wheel astrologically, we can see that between the trajectory of the sun and the trajectory of the earth, which is its opposition, we have the whole zodiac wheel imprinted into a baby's aura by the time they're 3 months old.
Right.
And I'll go back to Ra's chart, and I use 8 charts. The first chart is the human design chart. So in Ra's human design chart, he would be considered an ego manifester.
And just to
Ra.
clarify one thing, assuming I've got it correct, the human design chart is the mental world.
Yes, the human
Right.
design chart
Of
is
four
the
worlds.
mental world
Yeah.
chart on the conscious level. So I've labeled it conscious waking reality. The human design chart is only partial
Right.
in the mental world because we have to take into account the spiritual, which is REM. And during REM sleep, it's not a sleep design, it's a dream design.
Mhm.
And in the dream design, when we have rapid eye movements, clearly we have an ajna center, or we would have no rapid eye movements. So that would be measurable. So there is evidence that there is feedback between the cortex during REM sleep and the cortex during wakefulness.
Okay.
It's why we don't remember all components of a dream. So the prenatal lunar design, which Ra was given as a dream design laid on its side, I've put vertically because if you don't have it vertically, you don't have the Ajna center that can communicate with our waking design.
Okay.
Then we have the emotional world, which is the prenatal solar minute. And I leave it in a 64 gate matrix, although the matrix for the emotional world has no solar plexus. Very interesting component. And the biology design has no ajna or crown and no, it does have a splenic center, I believe.
So if someone else were to have their birth date and time and looked in this, we will find that they would always have the open solar plexus in that emotional design, right? That would just be completely open because there's no activations there. Is that correct?
No, because if we use the four worlds, it could be activated by a transit and
So,
it might show up in that world. But the portal between the emotional world and the waking world is the 59-6. So the 59th gate is the portal to the, I call it the emotional angelic world, because psychologically, emotions only occur in the reality world of 3D, not in the spiritually transformed world of emotions, which is a higher octave frequency.
mhm.
So we're talking about energetic frequencies here. And okay, so the solar chart that Ra was working with looks at 3 months before birth and birth. The spiritual world is a week before birth and birth, and that corresponds to when a baby drops. 2 days before birth, we have the Braxton Hicks contractions and the mother's hormones have shifted. And then an hour and a half before birth is the physical layer, and that's transition of labor. And postnatally, we do the same thing. An hour and a half after birth, the baby's breathing on its own. 2 days after birth, the milk comes down, whereas those 2 days are attachment days for mother and baby.
Mhm.
A week after birth is the spiritual design. The spirit is anchored. It's when in Judaism we name the baby. I mean, not name the baby, we do the bris. And in other religions, it's when they name the baby. So there's data across cultures for it being an important time in a baby's life. And then 3 months is a very critical marker. It's when the baby reaches and has choice. Now, one of the ways in which my work differs from Ra's work is Ra believed we had no choice. And I believe, based on the charts, that we do have choice. At 3 months of age, a baby has volition. They choose what to relate to in their environment and what not to.
Excellent.
It's a very critical marker in a baby's life.
Cool.
So let's
sorry,
look at Ross. What?
can I pause you right there? Because I think that's so important, what you're saying about no choice as well. Because you've been removed from the human design community for 20 years. No choice, says the voice, is this, it's like a meme. It's on shirts, it's on stickers, it's on, like, it's basically planting a spell, as far as I see it, of not having choice. The way I look at it, and maybe because I have an open head and ajna mentally, I just couldn't accept that.
I didn't accept it, and I'm a single definition manifestor in the human design chart.
Yeah.
But from a psychological perspective, and I've spent 50 years in private practice, giving people the empowerment of their choices.
Yeah. Well, when you said, because the other day, it was about a week ago, and you had implied it before, but I think you said no choice is bullshit or something. And I just remember thinking, like, oh, isn't that a relief? Because I kept fighting against it mentally, and it felt very disempowering. I believe I have a choice in how I show up. And so I choose to show up trying to improve by 1% every day. That's all I'm trying to do. And the more I do that, the more synchronicities and awesome stuff happens. And so it's quite simplistic, but I didn't like the idea of not having a choice in that. It just immediately made me feel like not trying.
Well, more importantly, even than choice, Sean, is when I began looking at these charts. And remember, I did the statistics on the human design chart, and I also did statistics on the dream design.
Mhm.
And what I found in the human design chart is that roughly 33.5% of the population are manifesting generators. But when you look at the integrated chart of all 8, Ra becomes a very strongly defined manifesting generator. And 95% of the population become manifesting generators in their integrated design. So think about it. It makes sense that we were designed by our creator to reach our fullest potential.
Mhm.
And at that point, when we're born, every cosmic energy has already been imprinted into our aura. So, of course, we have choice. Of course, we're made to manifest. And 95% of the people are manifesting generators. And in fact, you can see how different the integrated chart looks from Ra's human design chart.
Mhm.
Now, Ra was a really great storyteller. He had the 5720. He didn't really plan what he was going to speak. I never saw Ra read a book. And, Ra and I were friends to the point that when he got married in April of 2000, and I lived in California, I baked him a wedding cake and sent it overnight. He showed up at my house unannounced before he moved back to Ibiza because he lost Lokai's visa. So Ra and I had a very nice relationship, and I taught with him. He was very much an ego manifester. He liked to be first. He didn't ever want me to do anything without running it by him. And in fact, he got quite angry at me for finding the calculations and admitted to me that it showed something that he couldn't see any other way. But let's look at the chart itself and not the man who was in process. And he admitted to being an ego manifester. And he liked to be first. He was very competitive. He had an open solar plexus in this design, but notice that in the spiritual design, he gets the 1222 and he gets the 4521. Now, the 4521 from a research perspective is the only center in the whole body graph that is directly connected to the throat. We have the solar plexus connected, but it's not the heart itself. And the heart itself, what does it need? It needs oxygen. So isn't it brilliant that the heart center and the heart muscle itself gets oxygen directly from our breathing? And then it circulates it through the 5125 to the rest of the body. So when you think about that, the importance of breathing in someone who has the 4521 is very critical. Same thing with the 12. And the 1222 is a channel that activates emotional reactivity. And Ra was an emotional empath, picking up emotional energy from the people around him and not always knowing how to transform it.
So I have a question because I was just writing it down there, but you paused. Did Ra meditate? Like, did he
No.
breath work? He wasn't.
Ra was addicted to marijuana and drugs. He was smoking constantly. He was a nicotine smoker as well, many packs a day. His diet was abominable. And he accused his wife of being the food police. But Rod did not know he was emotional, and he could be very nasty to people.
Right.
And then he would be nasty and then he'd make up with them. He was an emotional empath. He was a sacrally, for the most part, undefined in each layer, which is important because he didn't know he was picking up energy from other people. And he was. So what I look at when I'm looking at these charts is, okay, he was a very strong spiritual manifester. So what that tells me is that he was a good channeler. Chiron was in the 43 in all of his charts. And I use Chiron. Not everybody does. Rod didn't use Chiron. I use Chiron because anyone born in the 1900s had Chiron active in their chart.
Right.
And it's a planetary body that speaks of gifts and healing. Ra used his ajna to the throat, which he didn't know he had because he didn't use Chiron, but he used it to channel information from the voice. And he used it when he gave his classes to just speak. And he was a phenomenal storyteller. And some of the stories are true, and some of the stories are not so true.
Right.
They have some truth even in their falseness, but he was, because of his perspective of no choice, he disempowered people with the way he interpreted things. And he also didn't make the connections for example, between the self-center and the Tefereth, or the self-center in the Tree of Life, each of which have 8 channels coming out of them. So there are correspondences, because I've been educated in all of the components. I've been able to put pieces together that were part of my research and part of the task to decipher scientifically what needs to be deciphered. And
Right.
that is the integrated chart. Ra, in an integrated way, had a very powerful chart. He had a goal. The 5432 is one of the priority channels. In the priorities, the first priority in an integrated chart is to look at the 4521. The second in him is the 1222. The third is the 1648. Hold on a second. I need to close my door.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
All right.
So I look at the integrated with priority channels. And the reason I look at the 4521 first is because he doesn't have the 34, which would take priority.
Okay.
The 34 is the taming power of the great. So all of the complex channels that have the 34 are a priority in reading a chart. You have the 34, 5720.
Yeah,
And I think you have the 10 also.
I do.
So
yeah.
Ra was constantly being fed information intuitively. He had he seen his integrated chart, maybe he would have stopped smoking. Maybe he would have lived longer. I don't know. But it's important that he had a goal to get the information out and to create it. His goal was to create it as a legacy for his family. Because when I knew him, he was literally bankrupt.
Right.
And he accomplished that, I assume. I don't know. So the man was a powerful man. He didn't know he had skills and depth. And in some of the books, he talked about that I had the skills and the depth that helped him to get some of the material out.
Right.
But he did have the skills and the depth, and he had the ambition and the goals. And what he didn't have was a strong direction of self in terms of himself. He was very much at the mercy of the energy around him. And one of the reasons Ra trusted me right off the bat was because I was a sannyasin. And most of the people on the inner circle, certainly in the early days of design, were people who had been at Osho's ranch in Oregon.
Right.
They were not good people. Some of them held the machine gun for Osho. One of them was his chauffeur. Some of them worked in the kitchen. 6 months after Marvin and I got back from India and the ashram, we burned everything associated with Osho in the ashram.
Oh, wow.
Because there were negative energies coming off of them. And we burned them in our fireplace and never looked back. So
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
ask your question.
I was just curious about that, because the Osho thing has come up a number of times, even for me, like how I got introduced to it 2 months before I met you. Like it was kind of like I was slightly educated, pop culture wise to it. Um, and then, I remember reading or seeing that Osho had said he was 100 years ahead of his time. They were kind of creating a world of where we need to be, which was meant to be, I think, community.
Osho, when I was in India in 1978, Osho and I took sannyas. So I was as close to, I was maybe a foot away from Osho, looking right into his eyes. There was nobody there. He was a clear channel at that point. And I took sannyas August 4th, 1978, and I met Marvin at the ashram. We've been together since the day we met, and it's 46 years. But the people around him
Yeah.
were not good people. And they poisoned him, literally.
Mhm.
So, but my point about the ashram is that because I was a sannyasin and associated with Osho, I immediately became part of the inner circle.
Mm.
And the people who he was associated with, Marianne Winokur, Chetan, Zeno, Chaitanya, they were all sannyasin. So
do you think Ra seeked them out, or they found him, or it was a bit of
they
a
found him. A lot of them were in Ibiza.
okay?
They found him. Osho died January 20th, 1990, and Ra came on the scene in 1992. So they were homeless, so to speak. And he served as the anchor.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed a guru. So he became their guru. And it was early. I had problems with the formulaic nature in which it was being taught. And I never understood about the emotional wave because I'm not emotionally defined. And I remember Zeno saying to me, it doesn't, when you say an emotional wave, it doesn't ring true. And I said, Zeno, I've never had an emotional wave. So no, I would not be saying this except it's the formula and you want me to say it. But human design, as it was taught by Ra, was a formula.
Mm-hmm.
And you were judged on a reading if you said the right words.
Mm-hmm.
The human design chart is incomplete. As you can see, if you look at Ra between the prenatal lunar and the postnatal lunar chart, you see that, I'm trying to move the window that's covering it up on my screen. You see that he gets the 5432. And it's so critical for him. The spiritual goal of getting design worldwide was what he lived for.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot see that in his human design chart. The 1-8 is in his spiritual design, not in his human design. His contribution on the unconscious level to humanity is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And the gates of the self center, once they're tied into the tree of life, they take on a whole other meaning in terms of being able to delineate from a psychological perspective where someone is in their psychological process of actualization.
Mm-hmm.
self-actualization. Jung believed that the tree of life was the blueprint for self-actualization. And as you study the Kabbalistic tree of life, indeed, the paths of intelligence take you through the stages of initiation and the four worlds, because each Sefereth has four worlds. Ra never studied the tree of life. I asked him one day, and wouldn't let him off the hook. And I said, so Ra, what did the voice tell you about the major arcana in the tree of life? And he said, oh, we don't need the tree of life. We have human design. I said, and I was, I remember it so well. I was standing in my kitchen, as was he, and he walked into the living room to get away from me, and I followed him. And I said, no, Ra, what did the voice tell you? And he said, oh, the only thing the voice told me about tarot is all in the ajna, the throat, and the self center, the major arcana. So it took me quite a while to figure it out, but I got the layout and I published it. It can still be found, and I will republish it. But look at Ra's chart. He didn't realize that he had an emotional definition, that he was right. The 1222 is a channel. It's a portal channel between the worlds. It's a portal to the spiritual world. And it is active when we sleep. So a lot of the downloads that Ra got came when he was unconscious. And he also got the 1-8, which he didn't know he had. And he also got, and I'm so sorry he didn't know that he got the 48-16, because he really wanted the 48-16, because it's the depth and the skills. And he got it 2 days after he was born.
He just didn't know because...
He didn't know because he never looked at these charts.
Right.
He got very angry at Eric for doing the calculations for me. He was angry that I did them, but one of the last communications I had from him, he said he looked at what they added in Loki's chart, and it was something that he would not have been able to see any other way. And he said that to me in an email. But when we look at him as a total person, we see that he liked his freedom, the 53-42. We see he operated very clearly as a manifesting generator. And the manifesting channel went, the only way it could manifest was through his goals and through his depth and intuition. And then the social aspect of it came secondarily. But he did want to be in control, and he was very insistent on that. It was one of the reasons I broke with him, because he didn't want me teaching anything that didn't come from him. And because I found things statistically that didn't hold, my research took me in places he didn't anticipate it would take me. And, he didn't know about it.
Was that his ego coming out just extra strong? Like he just couldn't, it was overpowering for him, basically.
He wanted the research to be his research, and yet when I would show him the output and say, Ra, okay, the factor analysis holds, so we know the centers are real. We know that the type is real, but there were 5, not 4. And he literally said to me, "You teach 5." But I said there were 4, so I have to teach 4.
Mm,
My ego won't let me change and say 5.
yeah. And I remember I'm sure you said this a couple weeks ago. Wasn't he trying to impress his father?
Yes. He
Yeah.
said, and you'll see in the books, he said his father wanted him to be a doctor, and he didn't have the 4816, which would have been necessary in his mind to become a doctor.
Hmm.
So he wanted to teach healthcare professionals because that would, from an ego standpoint, show his father that he had made it.
Yeah. To feel valued from his father. This I just need
And
to.
that's why he did the PHS system, which unfortunately is bullshit.
Mm,
There's no truth to any of the gates and the lines that Ross said had meaning
mm,
statistically. Now, from a intuitive standpoint, do I talk about them, as though they're real? To some degree, we all have to,
mhm,
because we're still learning. But it would be really nice for me to, once the human design community, if they embrace any of this, for us to do some studies with our population, uh, from a anthropological sociologic standpoint, collecting the data and saying, even though statistically this may not hold, you know, in terms of a factor analysis, if we can find people saying that they feel a certain association, then we have something else to look for.
mhm.
I mean, the only thing I had to look for when I was doing my research was the structure of the body graph and what Ross said about certain things. And those things didn't hold.
Right.
But, you see, the man was an extremely strong manifesting generator who um, wanted to be first, who wanted to initiate, who wanted to make a contribution, who wanted to be a role model. He wasn't such a good role model,
Mhm.
but he got his mission out to the world. And for that, I'm extremely grateful.
Same.
Um, and I liked him.
Mhm.
We had fun with him. We, he liked Indian food. Um, one night before a lecture, we ordered Indian food. And I eat my Indian food very spicy. And he said, well, make mine sort of mild. It was too spicy for him. And he ate it and he had a stomach ache the whole night. The poor guy. Um, he went to hockey games with Marvin. And, I have fond memories of him sitting on our couch watching TV with us. And um, he got to be really affectionate with all of our cats.
Oh, really? Mhm.
Uh, at the time that we worked with him, um, we had to, in 1999, we put Holly to sleep, the female who was Marvin's soul cat. And Ra was there when we put her to sleep. And then once she was gone, we had the litter of kittens. So Ra was on the scene with us in 2000 when our kittens were born. And so he met the twins.
Mhm.
And I didn't know at the time that I would use them. Well, no, Joe died. They were born in 98. So we didn't get them before. So how was the time? I have my years mixed up, but in any case,
Mhm.
it's
I have many
it,
questions.
it, Okay, ask whatever questions you want to ask me. I'll tell
Yeah,
you the best I can.
let's think about which one I want to ask first. So, well, actually, the first one is, you said recently you've reached the accumulation of your work. Was there some missing piece or calculation that just clicked into place? And how long ago was that? And what was that piece?
No, the piece is that my real work is to teach the four worlds as a personality theory
Okay.
and to write a book about the four worlds. And um, if I look at my education at University of Chicago, I was studying the four worlds.
Mhm.
Jung talked about four types. The validation I have that we actually live in four worlds is that these charts validated for me by the calculations the critical periods in human development. Because as a developmental psychologist, I knew those times. I knew that when a baby breathes on its own and the umbilical cord is cut, it's a developmental critical few hours.
Mhm.
I knew that when the milk comes down for the mother and the 2 days prior when there's the colostrum, that attachment happens. And in psychological work, one of the things we look for is, does the person have an issue with attachment? I didn't identify as a critical period the postnatal lunar but it marked so many cultural, I'm a cultural anthropologist. It showed me that there is a real cosmic marker for that critical period of time when spirit is anchored in the fetus, in the newborn.
Right.
And the pediatric literature now refers to the first 3 months of life as the missing fourth trimester. So the being able to delineate astrologically that if we're going to really look at a person and say this is who you are, we need to look at these 8 time frames because the person is not whole until 3 months after birth.
Right.
And manifestation takes 3 months. So at birth, this first chart is this first natal integrated vehicle approach to life, shows how you look design wise at the moment of your birth in the four worlds. Because you have a spiritual component when you're born, you have a physical, you have an emotional. Now, Ra at that time was a emotional manifester, not a manifesting generator. He didn't get the generator part, and you have to look back and see, where did it hook up? It hooked up the 42 to the 53. It took him 3 months to become a sacral being.
Mm.
So Ra was not someone who knew in the moment what was right for him.
Right.
It took him time to process and to feel it out, to see if it was right. So, probably when he showed up in California at her home, and within 3 or 4 days said to us, I'd like you to do the research and become my business partner, he hadn't really felt it through.
Mm.
So
he couldn't even show up with, yeah, I get that. Sorry, go ahead.
So, I didn't have all the charts at that point.
Of course.
And had I had the charts, I would have waited and said, Ra, let's wait and see if a month or two from now, you still feel the same way.
Mhm.
But he wanted Marvin and me to form a research arm of human design that would not be contaminated by the human design community. He says it very clearly in the books, all 13 of them. And he acknowledges the importance of integrating the matrices. You have other questions. I don't know how long I've been talking, but we're going on a long time.
You've been going good. I'm enjoying it. Hope, are you still good energy wise or?
Sure.
Sure. So, and you said it before, and I liked it. Was something to the effect of like in 3 months you can manifest kind of
Oh,
anything.
yeah. So
Walk in.
anybody, let's look at the trajectory.
So
So
can I just, because I just want to finish that thought though, because Ra always said it takes 7 years to decondition. I wonder how you feel about that. And then, I have heard it takes some cells in the body take 7 years to replace themselves, but
it
some
is
take years,
true. It
right?
is true that we replenish all the cells in our body over a 7-year period. However, I do not believe that we are conditioned.
Mm,
I would never I never use the not self as a term. As a psychologist, it is completely disempowering from my perspective. What the pain is that I see clinically over a practice of 50 years and thousands of clients, because for the first 30 years of my practice, I was seeing 40 clients a week, every week. So the pain that I see in people is that their soul is not being acknowledged, that who they are and who they know themselves to be is something that an individual never lets go of. And I honor that my clients, whether I'm just doing a reading or it's a client who I'm doing therapy with or coaching, that my clients know who they are.
mhm.
And their pain is when other people don't acknowledge who they know themselves to be, both from the standpoint of their gifts and also their vulnerabilities. And when somebody says that they are weak in an area, we need to listen to them. We need to help them figure out how they can transform that
Mhm.
using the energy they have access to.
Mhm.
And remember, we have access to cosmic energy every single month. We become a manifesting generator. Everyone, every month, becomes a manifesting generator at some time during the month.
Oh, really? And
Yes.
that's it. Like I have, you've said a couple of things in the past that were very interesting, but just like, you were talking about the stock market even, and just different days. Do you want to just elaborate on that a bit more? Because I think that's really interesting. Oh, so, and I could go in so many ways with this, but and because you've been kind of removed from the community, there's this projectors are here to kind of like guide the energy of everything. But and if 20% of people are projectors, which we're saying here they're
No,
not,
all of
and
that stuff
try
is that one of the reasons I absolutely have not released the data in its raw form is that when I presented the data at one of the lectures, I think it was the biology lecture, and some of the people wanted me to release percentages of open and closed centers. I refused because they wanted to use the data, to misuse the data to confirm the human design stuff. And it didn't confirm it, it refuted it. that people did not die of AIDS if they had a 27-6 line. Profile is an artifact of the math. So, for example, if I were looking at Ra's pattern, I call it the pattern of orientation, not a cross. A cross has a bad connotation.
Mm-hmm.
In astrology, a cross is a hard aspect. So I call it a pattern of orientation. Ra was the clarion. And then he was the pattern of penetration. That's his two crosses. If you talk about crosses, how did that operate in his life? What meaning did it have for him? Let's look at the process of the man instead of trying to label him something like I was taught to do as a DSM. Oh, you're depressed, or you're anxious, or you're autistic. Isn't that limiting?
The labels are brutal.
You know, a projector is a projector only at the moment of their birth. But within the first month of life, they've experienced every zodiac energy through the moon. And it takes the moon one day to transit the earth. So in one day, something turned on and off. And the next day, something else turned on and off. And the next day, something else. Well, here it is. Here's the mandala. He went from 61 all the way around by the time he was 3 months old. And the moon made how many cycles in that 6-month period? Every month, every cycle. I mean, we are complex, multidimensional beings who are here to manifest our potential. That is my message. My message is that we're here to integrate the worlds. And if you take the Kabbalistic tree of life, 332 paths of intelligence, multiply it by 12, you get 384. That's the number of lines in the I Ching. There's a reason we're here to integrate the Kabbalistic tree of life into the integrated body graph. It will show us how that person is being initiated into full actualization. Every human being is here to actualize. And when you look at the charts and you look at the sequence, you can learn how to set, because manifestation takes 3 months, the beauty is when we set our intent, we get 3 months to correct it. We get 3 months to tweak what our goals were and to use our spirit to align properly. Ra had the 5818 channel completely wrong. He doesn't have it, but it is not a channel of parental difficulty. It is a channel of judgment. In the tree of life, it is the channel of frequency and judgment. Are you on the right path? Is your frequency aligned with your inner self? And the inner self and the core, notice that Ra's self-center is a little bit weak. He has the 5125 and the 10 and the 1-8. Those are, the 1-8 is a higher octave path of intelligence, but the 10 and the 25 are personality paths of intelligence. So Ra was really here to learn about himself as a personality. And because of his ego, he wasn't really open to the science that could have expanded his system.
Right.
He did, I asked him one day, he was sitting outside our living room. He liked our patio a lot. And he was sitting out there, and I walked out and I said to him, Ra, why did you choose us? Because I knew he wasn't happy about it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and he said, the first day when I did all those readings, I knew. And he said, believe me, it wasn't by my choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he needed somebody to do the research. And when I met him for the first time, I came in with my human design chart that I had hand colored. And I also hand colored some astrological progress charts that I had done, because I wanted to know how in the human design chart you could see that I had polio. How would you see in the human design chart that I did with my life what I did with my life? And you could not see it there.
Right.
So if you look at Ra's human design chart, you would not have predicted the power of the man. But when you look at his integrated chart, that's a very powerful person.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I did his astrology chart, and I did it.
Yeah, lots of questions or thoughts. I feel the need to say, because there'll be people that have invested a lot of time into traditional human design and have become professionals in that space, and so it's attached to their own ego and to almost reject possibly something new, right? So I
Right.
wanted to say out loud, just again, how empowering it was and how lucky I feel I am that I only had a clumsy, cursory knowledge of human design anyways, but I knew enough about my gates and channels from the traditional or the mental human design that there was a lot there. And but it
Sean,
wasn't enough.
can I stop the sharing and we're just going to talk?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
And but I want to say, I hope that anyone that's watching this that is kind of pessimistic, like just like it's another person trying to make a name for themselves and all those things that come out, and I've heard them.
Let me just say about that.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't even think about re-releasing the books before. My work is the four worlds.
Mhm.
My I'm a psychologist, social scientist. My work is to make visible that people live in four worlds, and that because the field of psychology has relegated us to the mental world, where we, in order to flesh it out, we say there's a conscious, a superconscious, and an unconscious, going back to Freudian terminology, or in Jungian terminology, a collective unconscious. I have the data to show how those components are actually part of a four-world process. And that at birth, we are more than just the reality world. And if parents would recognize the spiritual dimension of their children, and that emotions are only in the mental world, and that when a child is emotional, what they need to do is help that child transform it by using a different way of communicating than the language of the mental world. So part of my research once I delineated the charts and got the worlds, was to continue my studying. So I've studied different communication skills that I needed clinically to help my clients. But now I see retrospectively that each world has its own communication style.
Mhm.
And so my real work has nothing to do with human design. It's the research that Ra tasked me with that gave me the validation to teach the four worlds as a real personality theory.
Mhm.
And remember, I'm a social scientist, psychologist first, and a human design person, by the way.
By the way. Mhm.
So I've never in my career made human design the focus. My focus has been transforming people's lives.
Mhm.
And in order to do it, when I show people their integrated chart, especially people who have the central columns, like if somebody has the 214, they don't need anybody telling them what to do. I give them a meditation using clean language and tell them to recognize their own power.
Mhm.
So, for the human design people, I think reading the charts this way is easier than learning lines and tones, colors, and bases had no validity. And once Ross said to me, "Oh, you're going to find the data in the tones, colors, and bases," I said, "Okay." I went back and I tested it. And I used rotational factor analyses. What that is statistically is what we use in, for example, intelligence testing, or in looking to see if certain things hang together as a unit. And as I said, I found that the factor analyses found factors in the centers. Centers are real.
Mhm.
There were 4 centers in the root. There was three factors, 4 factors in the root. There were 3 factors in the solar plexus. There were 3 factors in the splenic center. So statistically, there are things about the body graph that let me know the body graph is real.
Mhm.
That's real. And the voice spent 5 days making sure I got it. So if we integrate the tree of life with the body graph, we can see where someone is in their process. And if we use the information, we empower people to know the timing of their decision making, the world in which they make the decisions, and the body graph becomes a process, not a thing. It doesn't define someone in a given moment, and neither should astrology.
Mhm.
So, I'm trained as an astrologer, and I study tropical astrology. And I said to my teachers, including Katie, Catherine de Jersey, who told me the day and time I met Marvin, she told me I'd move. She was my mentor astrologer, and I learned astrology to learn her secrets.
Mhm.
When I shared my system with her before she died, she looked at me and she said, "Do you think I'm too old to learn it?"
That's
I
awesome.
thought I was going to great depth in my astrology, but this is beyond.
Mhm.
So the I don't get bogged down with I have all of the channels are written, and they're written combining the different worlds. So if you're in the mental world and the spiritual world, it's very different than if you're in the emotional world and the physical world.
Mhm.
And it forms a figure 8. So you're always going between the mental and the physical, to the spiritual, to the emotional, to the mental. It's a figure eight. And that figure eight that we weave in our consciousness is now you see it, now you don't. Now it's on, now it's gone. And when you know that, for example, in very many people, because the lunar is so close in time, a lot of people get definition in the lunar design a week after they were born. And when they do, that tells me that they need to wait a week to make a decision, especially if the sacral comes on. And if they have the sacral and they lose it, then they need to wait till they get it back, because they're not going to know until they know. So there's faulty assumptions in the human design system based on the scientific research that I'm now clinically ready to release. Because I've studied these charts for 20 years.
Right. Well, you said earlier you have the data, but you also bring the depth. So I just want to thank you for that and for taking your time and getting it right. And I want to finish that thought from before. I know that I sense that some people watching this will be, I'm a projector, that this is what I do, that's what I've heard. And I encourage them to get the new data.
If
And
anybody wants a reading with me, based on the podcast, I can do a very simple overview in 15 to 20 minutes. And there is a calendar on my website where they can book 15 to 30 minutes with me free. And if they do that and I get their birth data from the calendar, then I am more than happy to spend that time with people and show them their integrated chart.
I think that's beautiful. And what I want to say to that is I knew just enough about my design from the previous mental stuff that when, it took a long time for even the gates and channels and things to even feel like they resonated. But once I saw my integrated chart and I just opened up my favorite app, Neutrino Design, and just started reading about the things that I didn't think I had, when I read them, it was more clear than anything had been before. And so I just encourage people to take you up on that offer. I mean, you'll be careful how many you offer to do, but energy wise, but I think it was super.
The more charts I do, the more data I have.
True. Yeah.
And the more, if I can empower a person who's been disempowered, like you, it's a gift.
It is.
And it's the least I can do. I will be releasing all 13 books with Ra's source material. I will not change any of his words, but what I am going to do is write a commentary based on the research. And what I came to in terms of readership ease is I'm going to just color code the commentary, so it won't interrupt the flow of the reader.
Right.
And take it for what it is. It's a research project that Ra trusted me with. And I didn't, despite the fact that I had websites and published stuff, it was sort of invisible. And in October of 2022, when I was standing at my husband's bedside when he had open heart surgery, doing the figure eights, the voice said to me, now you need to go public. You know what it is. You know how to read it.
Mhm.
And I sat down and I wrote all of the integrated channels.
Mhm.
Because you read integrated channels a little bit differently than the mental world. So every channel with every iteration and permutation is written. And the gates are written for all the worlds. And there are portals in each world. If someone has the 515, for example, that's in all worlds. So if somebody has 515 in their natal chart, they're a multidimensional being, picking up energy multidimensionally. And if they're not told how to use that, isn't that disempowering?
Mhm.
So I'm not here, I don't need credentials. I don't need accolades, I've gotten all that.
Mhm.
I'm the 10th Reiki master in the West. I met Mrs. Takata. My books have her information in them. I have studied with Tom Gordon, the originator of parent effectiveness training. That's a mental world skill.
Mhm.
Tom made me the organizational training director in Chicago in 1973. So I don't need the business. I don't need the professional title, but I did the research and God told me to make it visible. So when I get the voice telling me to do something, as it told me when I went to India, voice said to me, go to the ashram in Pune. I knew nothing about Osho.
Mhm.
As I boarded the plane, a client of mine handed me the book, Hammer on the Rock. And I opened it up, and Osho and I share the same birthday.
Oh, really? Hmm.
And I had no idea. I had not listened to his tapes. I just was told in a meditation, you go.
Hmm.
So I went to India alone.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
mean, so that's who I am. And whoever wants to hear about my system and the four worlds and learn how they operate and how they transform lives, I do a free webinar every Thursday.
Mhm.
This Thursday, there was a lady there, and I said, you look completely different than you have in the past. And I asked the audience for validation, and everybody raised their hand.
Hmm. Mhm.
Not everybody, most people, very strong, that her recognizing the four worlds and beginning to integrate it into her life made a huge difference.
Mhm.
So for the human design people, don't take my word for it. Ross said this is an experiment.
Mhm.
Use it and see. So ask yourself, when you know what you know, which part of you knows it? Is it
Mhm.
your mental? Is it your spiritual? Is it the emotional angelic? Or is it the physical?
Right.
And Ross said in, I think, the biology book, that when he was working with the dream matrix, he realized that it needs to be integrated into the waking design in order for, that the worlds have to be integrated or they can't function.
Mhm.
And so, I didn't know while I was doing it that I was fulfilling my promise to Ra and the contract I made with him, but I was. And I like that, because we see things retrospectively that we don't know while we're doing it.
Right.
And I did confirm with him, by the way, when I got the angelic matrix, which is the emotional matrix that has no solar plexus. I said to Ra, the voice told me there's another matrix. And he said, yes, the voice told him there was another matrix, but didn't give it to him.
Hmm.
So I got the matrix.
Cool. But yeah. There's so many questions I can ask, but I think maybe
And you will, Sean,
I
but
know.
not this time.
Yep, yep. Okay, we'll tell you what. Why don't we wrap up there? And yeah, let's do that. Anything else you want to
And
say?
all of my work is based on Noble.
Yep.
My first cat who died when he was 22. And it's I'm looking for the word. When I tell the story that the first night I had Noble, I never had a cat. And I knew I was driven to get a Siamese cat. Just driven. I was a second year graduate school. And we went to pick him up on a Saturday. We came home with him in the evening. I knew nothing about a cat. So I went to sleep. My husband was in the other room and he jumped onto the bed. And I kept putting him off the bed, thinking, I don't want a cat on my bed when I sleep. He walked to the foot of the bed and he looked at me. And I laid back and he jumped with a paw on either side of my head. And he looked me right in the eyes. And I said, okay, I understand. And on a soul level, he spoke to me. And he loved me so unconditionally and so powerfully that he gave me the courage to do the work I needed to do. And even as a graduate student, I studied Jung, and that was 1965. Nobody was talking about Jung. And when I taught in college, I taught Jung.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught about the collective unconscious and the spirit. And Noble kept that. What I tell people is when you have a pet, and you're told by some, like TM people say, don't have a pet around you. I say the opposite. If you have a pet, that pet is keeping you in touch with the collective archetypes and the collective unconscious. And they may be activating things in your waking life that are active when you sleep, but you don't know it. So Noble gave me the courage to do what I knew I needed to do, and kept me in touch with spirit. And then his lineage is the twins. So I started this research way back in 1965 when I was in graduate school.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember you describing Noble helping you with patience as well. Like he would put his
Oh
palm
yeah.
and it would point out where it hurt. I think that's pretty cool.
He was, everyone who met him got a cat. Everyone.
Really?
And one of my clients, I started out doing groups in my 3-bedroom apartment in Chicago. And of course, Noble was there and his brother. And one of my clients had a phobia of cats. And she said to me, would you put him in a room? And I looked at her and I said, no, it's his home. So he needs to have free reign,
Mm-hmm.
but I will help you not be afraid of him. And within a couple of months, she went and got 2 Siamese cats.
Mm-hmm.
So um, whether people embrace this from the human design community or not, it's their choice.
Mm-hmm.
They definitely have choice.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to welcome any human design people who have an interest, and I will be teaching from Ra's books. So it's not hearsay, and I will say what held up and what didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want the truth of the research, Ra tasked me with that, and I'm fulfilling the task.
Yeah, I was.
That much to him.
Yeah, I was
See that
reflecting.
it was the human design calculation that gave me the information I needed as an astrologer to expand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very grateful to Ra for that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was reflecting, like it just kept coming up for me this whole chat, but I own dozens of human design resources, whether it's online courses I paid for or books, but I've never finished any of them. I couldn't. There was something incomplete about it. So, as I say, please pencil me in. Well, pen me in for the training because that's the one I want. So, and I think I kind of knew that internally somehow. So, yeah. So I'm gonna be.
You're more than welcome. And anybody who wants to be a part of it is welcome. And anything you throw at me about human design, I've done the research. I can tell you where it stands.
Mhm.
And I have the data.
Yeah.
I saved all the data.
Yeah.
So hopefully some statistician is going to come on the scene, and we're going to have a program that's robust enough that we can research. But also, I would like, part of what Ra tasked me with was doing research in the field.
Mm.
So I've done it with my own people, but I'm happy to design some questionnaires for human design people to give their people, and we can begin to do some real research in the field.
Right. And what do you need, or what help or assistance or services could some of these people that will benefit from meeting you, what are you looking for? Like we do need to, you shouldn't have to take up
Well,
the energy
you
and
know,
um,
I don't, I have 20 years of writing that I have to go through. I don't really trust other people to edit my words
mm,
because they have an energy to them,
mhm,
and I don't want the energy of what I'm saying to be changed.
right.
And I also don't like to use AI
Mm,
because it's not human.
mm,
And it, you know, yeah, it can make a sales letter or do something when you have the concept and the words. But I certainly am not going to design my class based on AI.
no, no.
So the help I need is the research, the feedback.
Mm,
Uh, I'm going to teach from Ra's books and add the commentary because I haven't done that. I will teach the Four Worlds class. And I think I want to do that as a 5-day, maybe week retreat, so that it can be experiential,
mhm,
because I need to teach as part of it the communication skills to use for each world.
mhm,
And if you see, as I do, a client who has any of the channels between the self-center, well, any of the 8 of the tree of life out of the self-center, you need to know which path of intelligence it is and what the task is for that person in their initiation. And the language for the channels between the self-center and the sacral center are clean language.
mhm.
which is a very specific way of communicating because there's no auditory, visual, or kinesthetic cues.
Mhm.
And it takes someone completely into themselves. So when I see somebody who has the 214, I give them a self-direction meditation. I don't tell them anything other than the direction that you're going in for yourself is really important for you.
Yeah.
But I don't say much more than that
Mhm.
because they know themselves. So I make an assumption. Everyone I see knows who they are. My job is for them to live it.
Mhm.
And for them to know that when something doesn't resonate, they don't need to embrace it.
Mhm.
It's really simple.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
And
that would work.
memorizing gates and lines, and I don't use the lines. They're an artifact. And they were, I was there when Ra made them up. Ra was basically honest about what he was doing. He was a good storyteller, and
Mhm.
he made sense out of a body graph that made no sense
Mhm.
because he didn't have the tree of life.
Mhm.
So he couldn't, and it's not a one-on-one correspondence. And I grappled with that a lot.
Mhm.
I finally figured it out. But your design is a living thing. It's not, it was formed as an integrated whole by moving energy. And there's a lot more in it than just what shows up in the channels.
Mhm.
So we have to use it as a way in to our consciousness, not as a limitation on our consciousness. So the human design chart itself is a not self.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same. Like I'm grateful for what Ra brought. I'm ready to take another swing at it with uh, carefully laid out, thought out, researched data, because that's data's king.
Um,
um,
what I will need, well, will need down the road, and I would trust you with it, um, would be as I finish the books to have somebody proof them. Now, I've already proofed the ones that have been published, and I went through them a second time and edited and made sure the commas were in the right place and the language was right and the typos were fixed. And as I'm learning with my cosmic guidance book, no matter how many times I proof it, I'm too close to it to see the typos.
totally.
So
Yeah.
I don't know, it's going to become clear. And I welcome anyone who wants to be involved in researching, in exploring, in using what Ross said and looking at the science next to it and how we navigate that
Mhm.
because it's a different world.
It is. I've got a name for
And
it.
the piece that I'm doing for myself is teaching the four worlds as a workshop because that's what I love to do. Not intellectual, but it is intellectual. I've already taught it once, and teaching it over a 5-day period as a workshop will be experiential. And I'll be able to teach the different communication skills that, as a therapist, you're taught will solve anybody's problem, but they don't
Mhm.
because they're in the wrong world.
Mhm.
And you can't solve a problem at the level of the problem. So let's stop.
Let's stop. Okay, well, lovely to have you on today. I'll just stop recording and then please stay here
Okay.
because I want to talk to you about a couple of things. All right, we'll hit stop.